Happy Halloween, everyone! My name is Dan, the Spectre behind that Kaito Dan, and since I got a bit of free time this holiday season, since we don't have RWBY at the moment, I figured now's as good a time as any to discuss something RWBY related that's a little more dark and fearful. Though before we continue, I must warn you of something truly terrifying coming up. Spoilers! If you haven't seen up to the Volume 8 finale, I suggest you turn tail and run now. Anyway, ever since their official debut in Volume 4, RWBY's resident Wicked Witch Salem and her villainous faction have been our big bads in the shadows, making things very troubling for the world of Remnant and our heroes. However, the group has recently become much smaller as of late and less united, with Watts getting the trick with his treat, Hazel becoming his own funeral pyre, Emerald jumping ship, and Neo going overboard, leaving Salem with just the returning but still self-serving Cinder, and the pair of Tyrion and Mercury, who are currently having a vacay over in Vacuo, none the wiser to what's going on in Atlas. After once boasting a maximum of 8 present-day members, half the group now remains, leaving some to wonder if Salem will draft in some new blood to make up for the losses. After all, she's done so in the past, so why stop now? Granted, Salem's a force unto herself that doesn't really necessarily need a group to command, beyond the Grimm of course, but she's proven time and time again to make great use of having many foul followers, so I'm not too surprised to see some people hoping that Salem gets some new pieces on the board to utilize. Me personally though, nah. I think we're a bit too late in the game to be introducing some new supporting villains right now when we still got plenty of mileage left in Cinder, Tyrion, and Mercury. Besides, we already have some replacements of sorts on the way, the Grimm fusions. I very much doubt that after the Hound proved to be a very effective test run, Salem will stop making more, especially now that she has the Staff of Creation on hand, and a solid pick for at least one new host body. But all of this got me thinking. Let's imagine if Salem had her idea for Grimm fusions earlier in the series, and she wanted to make a second group of generals in her fold that is solely made of these corrupted nightmares. Better yet, why not add a theme to this new inner circle by making it a sinner circle of sorts, with its members all being based on the 7 deadly sins. See, Salem wishes to use the relics, the items that are made by her other sworn enemies, the God Brothers, that were born as the physical manifestations of the gifts given to humanity by the gods: creation, destruction, choice, and knowledge. And for the longest time, those gifts have always reminded me of our 7 virtues, a collection of moral traits that we like to say embody the best of ourselves if we follow them. And in turn, we have the 7 deadly sins, moral values that bring out the worst in ourselves. Well, considering the Grimm are fueled by humanity's negative emotions, and Salem already makes it a point in her tactics to cause friction, fear, and sadness in her enemies through mental warfare, why not go all in by giving life to these sins as Sin Grimm, sub-boss level corruptions of our good morals meant to further lead humanity to its demise, with the sins represented through the beast abilities, appearances, and their host. I should stress though, this is just me having a bit of, what if fun, and it's not me speculating on what could happen in the future. Though, hey, if any of this does appear in the series, let's just call it a lucky guess. Regardless, because of this being some non-canon fun, I am going to be tweaking the canon a little bit to explain a few details and inclusions, though again I must stress, spoilers ahead. So, with all that out of the way, the question now is, who would be fitting sinful souls to become part of Salem's Sinner Circle? Well, let's start with the most obvious pick, Summer Rose. Even with this being a non-canon discussion, we all know Summer is going to be the next likely host that we'll see as a Grimm fusion in the show. Heck, it's been long teased even before these fusions were a thing that Salem would use Summer against RWBY in some way, and now we know the likely means to do so, it makes sense to get the obvious inclusion out of the way first, with Summer being our dark embodiment of lust. Now, immediately, lust will make you think of certain things that would definitely nuke my channel within an inch of my life if I shared anything of the sort on here, but while lust does tend to focus mostly on feelings that do lead to doing the horizontal monster mash, it's also just another form of intense love. And you know what they say, no love is stronger than a mother's love for their kid. So wouldn't it just be truly evil of Salem to have Summer, who put the protection of those she loves above her own life, and the one who hoped that her daughter would never face the hardships that she had to face, now becomes the sin Grimm that is made specifically to cause pain to those she loves by making her fight her own daughter. That familial love would likely cause RWBY to second guess using her silver eyes, and the sadness born from seeing Summer back from the dead under Salem's control would make the beast even stronger, making it an even harder foe to kill even if RWBY is able to will herself to fighting again. Oh, and while the first Grimm fusion took the form of a hound dog, I think it'd be cool as well if each Sin Grimm becomes a different animal for its base form that better ties to either its sin or their host. They'd still keep the hound's malleable transformation power, as that's a cool ability that helps the fusion stand out further from the regular breed, but having more unique base forms would also help each Sin Grimm stand out amongst the elite pack as well. So for Summer, I opted for a wolf. Now yes, we already have the Beowulfs, but we could use a different kind of wolf here, and it just feels more thematic given that RWBY's fairy tale illusion includes a big bad wolf, though in this case it's more Little Red's mother being swallowed up inside of him rather than the granny. Now before we carry on, one other thing to discuss is our understanding that the host needs to be a silver-eyed warrior to counter the opposing silver-eyed blast and possibly to help it survive being fully corrupted by the Grimm ooze. Well, considering this is a product of Salem's experimentation, let's also throw in the idea that she can transplant silver eyes into a different body. I mean, in all her years of having warriors hunted down, it would be a bit random for her to not even keep some for analyzing or for possible creations like this. I'm just saying, the Hound's host had its right eye covered in scars and Grimm slime, so maybe Salem did take one and left him the other to protect the beast. So, moving forward, I'm working under the idea that Salem can also make false silver-eyed warriors as part of the Grimm fusion, which now opens up the doors a lot wider for possible inclusions, such as with our next sin, Sloth. Sloth might seem like a tricky Grimm to create since it's all about being slow, lazy, and lacking motivation, which isn't exactly the most dangerous elements to confront unless you're a comfy bed. But other media have shown ways to work around the sin's limitations, and to be fair, RWBY does have a very fitting individual that has harbored Sloth's core values to horribly great effect, Leonardo Lionheart. Despite being the Haven headmaster and a trusted ally to Ozpin, Leo buckled under Salem's presence, tucking his tail between his legs and doing whatever it took to save his skin, such as creating false student identities for Cinder's group, selling out Mistral's huntsmen to be slaughtered, and considering turning in Ozpin to Salem if it could get his freedom back. When your subservience and cowardice aids in the deaths of hundreds of people, that's pretty sinful indeed. But Leo, according to Ozpin, was also a much braver person before all of this happened, so perhaps as a Sin Grimm and a lion, for that irony factor, he would be akin to Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood's version of Sloth, in being a sleeping giant, most times slow, meek and tired looking, but once motivated with maybe say the promise of no more pain, this lazy kitty becomes a ferocious king of beasts that could make even the Hound's viciousness look tame by comparison. Next, a sin with a bit more energy to it, Wrath. At first, I did consider Hazel for the spot, since one way wrath is considered a sin is when it's directed at the innocent, and it leads the angered into an unhealthy situation, both of which do fit the big guy who, either by his own wishes or by Salem's orders, lashed out at several innocents, and it did lead to his forced submission to the Grimm Queen. But since this Sinner Circle is meant to be present alongside the Inner Circle, it wouldn't make sense to turn Hazel into a Grimm when he already fills out one position perfectly fine. So instead, I looked to another notable hothead, whose rage harmed many undeserving and turned a promising good soul into a monster. I'm of course talking about Adam Taurus. The Faunus renegade took to the path of violence following years of abuse and mistreatment from humans, and while his anger was justified, it still did lead to needless death after needless death by his hands, even towards his own Faunus kind. And do I even need to discuss how his anger towards Blake alone caused further uncalled for harm and torment? While it might take a more forceful hand from Salem to make him submit this time out, I could see Adam becoming a literal raging bull that acts as the circle's unstoppable juggernaut, a living bulldozer of a Grimm that gets stronger and stronger the more angry it gets, until it's eventually a wrecking ball of pure, unhinged wrath, incapable of feeling pain while it brainlessly does anything and everything to inflict pain on others. Next up, we have Gluttony, and I'm gonna be honest, this was the hardest one for me to pin down, even more so than Sloth. I mean, it's the sin about pigging out on food too much. No one in RWBY has any strong ties to food in such a way, and the only person with a noted bite in talk got slain years ago. So what do? Well, if we look at most definitions of greed, there's a common thread of the sinner indulging heavily in things that the needy are desperate for. So, to make this sin work, I retooled it a little, so instead of food, the resources are now something within the world of RWBY that fits much better. Lien and dust. Money, in general, is an easy resource to see get wasted. I think we can all agree on that. And there's plenty in Remnant who could do with some extra cash. While dust is a much rarer resource, but is often kept out of the hands of those who do need it the most, especially if a certain someone enforces an embargo on its distribution. Lest we forget as well the waste that can come with this gluttony. Vacuo being a prime example of this element, with Atlas's dust mining robbing them of their bountiful dust and leaving them with nothing but scraps, ruined landscapes, and abandoned mines. Another group of people that are in dire need of lien and dust are those living in Mantle. Compared to the rich and content up in Atlas, these guys are strapped for both of these elements. They could easily use some lien to help feed their families for even just a week and pay for any Grimm or work-related injuries. And some dust would be handy as well to, above all else, help them fight off the Grimm and the deadly cold. And who just happens to be the one person around here that controls dust shipments and has more money than he knows what to do with? Why, it's good old jackass Jacques Snee himself. Now, it's true that there is another notable sin that the SDC Kingpin would fit in quite easily, but again, considering how tough it is for me to make Gluttony work, and the fact that he does have a lot of resources that's going to waste, knowing full well as well that he could do much more good with it by sharing around, I decided it's still best to fit him in here. Jacques is probably going to be a late entry to this group, since there's some key moments in the personal arcs of the entire Schnee family that do work better with him still being just a vile human, but once Salem does decide to turn Remnant's most selfish billionaire into a beast of gluttonous darkness, perhaps he could also take the form of a vulture, an animal that's noted for picking off on the weak, vulnerable, and dying to satisfy their own needs. And in keeping with the dust theme, perhaps it could swallow up any dust to power itself with some strong elemental powers, or at least swallow up any dust-based attacks thrown its way. And since we already brought up pulling Jacques away from another sin, let's look for the second worst individual out there that can fit greed, which led me to the smooth criminal, Roman Torchwick. Now, while he's not as harmfully avaricious as Jacques, Roman did still live a life motivated by an understandable but still self-serving greedy drive that's caused some strife to others as he lied, stole, and cheated to survive. Those acts alone are greedy, and he was also willing to play ball with Cinder in helping her cause major trouble in Vale if it meant his sly ass could avoid her fiery temper, showing greed in a more self-preserving case. And as explored in Roman Holiday, which yes, I am still doing a review for, sorry for the delay on that, it all stems from him growing up as an orphan on the bad streets of Mistral. Our favourite swindler has done everything he could to rise up the food chains and make sure that his life has purpose instead of dying in a ditch, poor and forgotten. And while that is inspiring in a way, that desire did still motivate him to enact many self-indulgent criminal acts, and ultimately did lead to his own undoing, being too blinded in trying to crush Ruby's spirit with his viewpoint of the world's dog-eat-dog environment to notice his boasts were attracting Grimm. And yes, while in canon he has, died, perhaps in this alternative version of the story, Salem saw Roman's strong, voracious drive as too good to pass up, so she utilized it and brought him back from teetering over the edge of death to make for another lucky escape for the lad. Only, this time, that greed now fuels someone else's schemes, perhaps in the form of a greedy fox, an animal known for its cunning wiles that help it scamper into humans' farms to pinch at their stock and animals, except this beast could be hunting for weapons. Maybe with its transforming goo, it could change its limbs into whatever weapon it can swallow up in its clutches, making even this monster still harbor some of Roman's criminal ways. Just, don't tell Neo. At this point, you may have noticed that many of my Sin Grimm hosts are villains, with Summer being the only heroic face so far under the goop. Well, let's change that with our penultimate sin, Envy. There's been a fair few characters in the show with a bit of the green-eyed monster in them. Watts was envious of the praise that others like Pietro and Ironwood robbed him of. Crow is no doubt jealous of everyone who's not cursed with his bad luck, and Ilya made it quite clear in Menagerie that she was jealous of where Blake's affections were during their time in the White Fang. Interestingly though, I was halfway close to picking Penny for this. After all, in both her lifetimes, she had very clear envy towards others who were able to live like normal people, while she was forced to follow orders, be cut off from a regular social life, and ignore her own wants and desires to fulfill the pressure of being a robot weapon and later a seasonal maiden. But because the show did its own version of a corrupted Penny, and we already have a Sin Grimm that would wound RWBY alone with a ton of grief, I opted for someone else with a noted envious side bottled up within, that if made into a Grimm, would still strike a major blow to our hero's spirits. And she's also the character that I've seen the most brought up when talking about possible heroes turned into Grimm. That's right, my pick for the Sin Grimm of Envy is Pirro Nikos, the promising huntress who deep down had strong feelings of loneliness over not being viewed for the girl behind all the talents, beauty, and fame, secretly yearning for being viewed as a normal girl like anyone else, so much so that she even contemplated rejecting what she felt was her destiny to stay by the side of the one person who did indeed treat her normally, before being met with a cruel fate. Now, personally, I am of the mindset that I don't want Pirro to ever be brought back, as I much prefer RWBY making death be final, to make those losses feel impactful and meaningful, and well, Pirro certainly has done just that. But this isn't about what I want. This is what I think Salem would do in this scenario that I'm cooking up, and in this non-canon what-if narrative of mine, I could definitely see Salem somehow commanding Cinder to stop killing her at the top of the tower and instead turning Pirro into a Sin Grimm host. especially if she learned just how much pain it would bring to have her enemy see their friend and one of the most compassionate noble souls out there be turned into a creature of their enemy's bidding, whose internal coveting for something so pure and innocent is now helping its dark heart beat stronger. And in terms of what this envious entity could look like, perhaps to further drive in Pirro's tragedy in deeper, maybe we can go for a Grimm unicorn. A pure-hearted being much like Pirro, who is coveted by those envious of its horn and rumored gifts, while the unicorn just wants to live a free life, with the corrupted beast maybe using its ability to speak so it can mimic Pirro's voice and cry out whatever painful comments would cause even more grief to the listener, like, "Why me? This is not the destiny I hoped for." Or, "Jean, why do I have to be alone?" Cripes, now I'm making myself sad. Finally, let's quickly wrap this up with the last sin, pride, which is often called the sin from which all others arise from, and yet is also a sin that some debate if it really counts, considering all the good kinds of praise that we have out there. However, while those types of pride are all well and good, there's only one person whose pride was so overwhelming it did truly come before the fall. Of course, that means the stubbornly prideful General James Ironwood. James's unwillingness to accept that he's making a wrong call, to learn from his mistakes, and that the burden in protecting the world isn't left on his shoulders alone, led to many in Mantle suffering, the rest of Remnant growing hostile and desperate with the lockdown and dust embargo, and again the fall of himself and Atlas. It wasn't exactly a secret either amongst Salem and her cohorts that James's biggest weakness was indeed his arrogance. So if Salem needed a host that would be the perfect prideful catalyst, few stand out above James's iron-willed stubbornness. Well, that's not entirely true, as there is one other option if we do have to keep Ironwood's fall as per the canon. And funnily enough, this would then bring this guy into the canon proper. By that I mean taking RWBY Grimm Eclipse's big bad, Dr. Mellow, and turning him into a full-on canon character as the last Sin Grimm. The Mad Doctor made it quite plain that he had a major god complex, thinking he alone, with his scientific genius, could do what nature and evolution has failed to do. Perfect the Grimm, who he believed in his twisted ways can be controlled to make the world a better place, but only after some of his experimentation first. Perhaps in this reworked narrative of mine, Salem discovers what Mellow is up to in combining science with Grimm, and that's where she first gets the idea of creating a new breed of fused monsters, but with something more stable and more emotionally weaponized. So, as thanks for the idea, she makes Mellow her Pride Sin Grimm, truly defining the Sin's legacy by becoming the beginning of all Sin Grimm. As for the form and the power that either of these two contenders could have, let's make them go for the most dangerously prideful creature in the entire world, man. The fusions are already part beast, part human, but the sin of pride is so inherently human, it feels right for its base form to be predominantly human shape. And don't you lie, you know the visual of Ironwood or Mellow with a half and half human Grimm body would look really cool, as much as it does look frightening. Though perhaps this prideful pest could also grow stronger or bigger the prouder it feels in its role as their queen's new man of war. So there we have it, my out there idea for Salem's Sinner Circle, come literally full circle. It took some headwork and a lot of twisting around the canon elements, but I think if this was a real concept in the show, it would make for some quite tasty character drama, emotional impacts, and nail-biting fights. And again, this is just pure non-canon fun, and I very much doubt any of this will come true, even with the future Grimm fusions feeling like a certainty. But nevertheless, I hope you did enjoy this silly little bit of spooky seasonal silliness. And hey, if you got any better ideas for a Sin Grimm or a new Inner Circle, why not drop it in the comments down below? And while you're at it, hit the subscribe and bell buttons and tick the notification box to get every video from me as they drop. And follow me on Twitter at ThatKaitoDan for more on anything to do with RWBY, updates on the channel, and more. But until next time, have a happy Halloween, and peace out.